This will be covering Chapter 3 of interacting with Autodesk 3D Studio Max Design and exploring Autodesk 3D Max Design. We're going to start out by looking at the viewports and maximizing the viewport. You can look down here and you can choose, as you can see, this particular viewport is highlighted in yellow. And if you look down here, you have all kinds of different tools to either maximize viewports, or that's your maximize viewport toggle, or just manipulating the viewports in different ways, whether it's zooming or panning, any of those kinds of things that are very helpful. And I'll just show you real quick. You can maximize this particular viewport, and if you click it again, it goes back to what it was. Of course, there's a shortcut for that, which is hitting the Alt key and the W key, and that will do the same exact thing. And I suggest that you really look at the back of the book. There's a card there with all of the different shortcuts that would be very helpful to learn and will save you a lot of work in the long run. The application button, we're just exploring this interface. The application button is, of course, is up here. And if you're familiar with a lot of the other programs, that's the new Windows interface here, which has all the save, open, import. And this is where you can merge other models into your existing models, or import a non-native file format into 3ds Max. You just have a lot of different options here. But a lot of these are also represented on this quick access bar. So you don't always have to dig down into here in order to accomplish a save or an open or any of that. On the quick access bar, you can create a new scene, open a file, save file. You can undo the scene operation or redo the scene operation. And this shows you where your workspace is, what kind of workspace you're working with. And these sort of, you can either activate or deactivate the things on the quick access toolbar depending on how you want to, or even hide the menu bar, which would be this. You can hide the menu bar from here. See? And sometimes that's valuable if you just you're trying to save space so that you can maximize your viewports. Of course, when you go through the menu bar and we start looking at the items in the menu bar, a lot of them are things that you're familiar with in AutoCAD, and obviously the ones that are grayed out are inactive. So there's obviously, I haven't done anything, so there's nothing to redo. And cloning, there's nothing selected to clone. And so anytime something's grayed out, that is inactive. Again, look through these and familiarize yourself with all of the things that actually. Now these are create, and a lot of these things exist over here in your creation panel. Over here. But not everything. So, you know, if you can't find it over here, you might want to look under here. Got modifiers, here, infer even. You know, it's a very deep program. We won't be covering everything in this, but we'll be covering a lot of it. I'm just going to let you look at some of these on your own and familiarize yourself with it. The toolbars, which are these, these, you know, you have the undo, redo. You have a selection filter, So you can literally, when you have such a complicated model that you really want to limit what it is that you're actually selecting in a area, and you will get to that point. You can, say you've got some lights buried in a whole bunch of geometry. You can select lights, and and you can even use a crossing window and not be selecting anything but the lights. So, and the default is all. So, if you select anything, it's going to select it. Of course, you can select by name, and it's a good idea to, logically name your groups, your objects, so that you can use that tool and don't get lost in it. Rectangle selection region, of course you know that from AutoCAD and many other programs. And then you have your crossing window, and that means that if anything with this particular rectangular selection that's inside the rectangle gets selected, anything that actually intersects the rectangle gets selected, and everything inside of it. So there are times that of course your model gets so busy you can't use this one, and you want to use this one so that you're just selecting the things inside. These are transform tools. You've got move, you've got rotate, you've got scale, and those are for manipulating the primitives that you have or any of the objects that you've created, and in terms of moving them, rotating them, or scaling them. You're using that a lot. And this is creating a you have a gimbal which gives you the ability to orient your object to either the view, the screen, the world, apparent part. And that becomes handy in certain transformations that you start to implement. This is setting the coordinate system, which is down here. And this is actually setting the pivot point. These are your options for creating the coordinate system, which typically I think I just keep it in view. And this, of course, you will use because you'll want at times to rotate or transform an object in different ways relative to something else. Select and manipulate. That is used to modify, say, a mesh by creating manipulators. Keyboard shortcut override toggle. So this will enable you to override some of the shortcuts that are already, that you've set up even within the program. Here are your snaps, 2D and 3D snaps, and these drop down to show you that you've got the 2D and the 3D. And we'll get more into detail on all of these tools as we get along. You can create selection sets here, which is very useful because you might want to select 3 objects and create a selection set. That's pretty useful if, say, you're modeling some complex assembly that has 800 parts, and you want to create a selection set of, say, 50 of those parts. And you'll be able to select just those 50 without affecting the others. Here's your mirror command. You can actually select an object and mirror it, copy it. Align tools, and it's going to give you the different ways that you might want to align a particular or 2 different objects for every object on the that you've created. Manage layers. Of course, that opens this dialog, this box, and this gives, of course, I haven't created any layers yet, but if I did, there'd be a list of layers here, and you can use this similar to the way you would use it in AutoCAD, and name your layers so that you can organize things according to what you're actually creating and what makes the most sense in terms of organizing it. Things that you would want to manipulate together. So it's very similar to selection sets, but you've got it on a layer, so you can actually freeze that layer and cut it on and cut it off. Very useful. Now this toggles that ribbon. There's going to be times where you're just not using it, which I'm not right now, so I can get rid of that, and that gives me a little more real estate. Curve editor. Okay, you got the schematic view. Curve editor schematic view. And that represents an animation on a graph. And we'll get more into these tools as we go along. Material editor. I created a material a little earlier. I've deleted it since, but that'll stay there until I either get rid of it or and it'll also maintain the link. So the next time I open it, if that's not linked to something, it might bark at me and let me know that, you know, I don't have, I'm missing an object that's supposed to link to. These are your render buttons for render setup. And then you have additional tools that you can add on. And you can add them on through going to Customize and Show UI and Show Floating Toolbars. And when you click that, it's going to pop up a whole bunch of other toolbars that you can go ahead and dock. For instance, you can see I've got the Snap tools here. One of those toolbars are more Snap tools. And then this will allow you to constrain along an axis. And these are animation tools. And, you know, if you don't use them, you can always undock them and get them out of your way, or you can dock them somewhere else. Now again, these are called the viewport navigation tools, and as I said earlier, they enable you to navigate through your viewports with either zooming, we can actually put something in here, now you can hit your Z key and it'll zoom right in on whatever you have selected. So if you have more than one object in your viewport and you select them all, then it'll zoom in on everything. Okay, I'll Control A, which selects everything, and then Z, that zooms in on all of it. But play around with these and get used to them. And this toggles the one that you have selected, the viewport, so I can select that one and toggle in on that as well. And at times there will be a value to that, and I'll show you why. If I toggle in on this particular sphere or this particular view and I see that that sphere is created along the ground plane here, and I want it to be on the same ground plane as this cube, and I can select move and move it up to where it's, or you can set it to 0 here, which is probably a more accurate way of doing it. And keep in mind, these are animation controls. As you create keyframes, you can move through them back and forth. And again, this is all part of the animation part that we will get into later on. Now, just to sort of go over maybe the obvious, since most of you probably have had experience in AutoCAD, and this works very similar to AutoCAD. Right-clicking will end a command. Of course, in a box command and you right-click, that's what I mean. Obviously, if you have an object selected and you right-click, then it gives you a whole number of things that you can do to that particular item. And it's a lot of times it's quicker to rotate than to go all the way up here and choose your rotate tool. So once you get accustomed to this, you'll be using that instead of your toolbar. And this is where you may even want to hide your toolbar, because you're doing some of the commands that you can access this way. Is the fact that when you select an object, let me get back to my select command. If you select an object, and you go to modify, you can manipulate these different values with the spinner control, which moves either you see how I'm moving my cursor up or down, and it's changing the numeric value. Of course, you can hard code that value in by just typing in the one that you actually want. I probably do that more often than use the spinner. Again, with the segments, that becomes an important item, because that's going to enable you to create polygon, an editable polygon. And instead of just dealing with the actual modify properties, you'll be able to actually manipulate the faces, which is detailing. Now there's a panning hand, which you need to know about too, which if you have, say, one of these bars that goes off the screen, see how this turns to a hand? It'll enable you to actually drag the part of it that's off the screen back into the screen. The other thing I think you need to know is the difference between dialog boxes. There are two types. There's a modeless dialog box, and then there's a modal dialog box. The modeless dialog box would be something like this scene editor. So you can go here to the scene editor, and it tells you, of course, all of the things that you've created. You can freeze them. You can manipulate them in different ways. Customize them however you want. But you can still, that'll stay open while you go over here and say launch a command to move it, or manipulate it in any way, transform it, modify it. This will stay open. So they call that a modeless dialog box. The modal dialog box would be more like this customized user interface, where you go in here and you modify different things, and you click save, and then once you're done, you get out of it, or you have an OK button that kicks you out of the dialog box. And that would be, you typically would not leave that interface open while you're working. It would automatically ask you to adjust something, and then once you did, it would give you an OK, or an OK button, and then you would click OK or cancel, and that would then end your dialogue, and that would be called modal. Saving scenes. Of course, we talked about that a little earlier on. If this is the first scene you've created, you can click here. Of course, I've been working on this, and it's just, if I click that, it's just going to save it. But if you don't have anything saved and you click that, it will give you the Save As dialog, which will enable you to save it to where you want. And you'll generally want to save your scenes to the Scenes folder, you know, to be consistent with your linking. And just to show you the scene assets, what's under that are images. So if you have bitmaps, you might want to put them there. Of course, this has them in there, but they're not that file type, so they're not going to show it to you. But you have images, you have these different sounds, animations. That's where you really want to keep all of these things. Stay organized with it so that they don't end up everywhere. New scenes. You can go here, open file, and it's asking me if I want to save it. Don't say, I don't care whether I save that or not. And then it, you know, I'm here in the scene, so I can open up another scene if I want to, and open. And it's missing some external files. So this is going to, this will show you that at some point it had these maps, this particular path, and that means that I'm going to have to go back in and tell this program where all of those are, and I'll show you how that's done. See where it goes, browse. There I can browse for the actual map. And it'll tell you that it's missing these files. Well, if I go to browse, I should be able to add the maps path, because as you can see, this path is pointing to 3D Studio Max maps. Well, I moved that maps file over into my directory here, which would be on my desktop, and then I can go to here and select maps, and it says use path. Okay, use that path. Okay. It still couldn't find those items because those items don't exist in that path. And I don't know why they didn't ship it, and you'll probably have the same issue when you load those files from the CD that came with your book. You'll be missing these three files, which with those three files, obviously, they're missing all of these as well. But a lot of it's there. I mean, it looks pretty good, whatever it is. It's a robot of some sort. All right, well, that gives you an idea of how to map back to another directory in case you are missing files. Okay, if you need help, obviously, your help button is up here. You've got the tutorials. You can go into Autodesk 3D Studio Max, and you can either choose to download the files or have them on the internet. I choose to have them on the internet because I don't want to bring in gigs and gigs of stuff onto my hard drive that I'm only going to use every so often. And when you're ready to quit, you go up here and let's do some modification here real quick. quick, just so it'll bark at me. And I'll select the X button. And it will ask me, do I want to save? And yes, I do. All right, that should conclude. Chapter 3. And there are some exercises that you should try to go through here in class. And when you go through them, if you have any problems, I'll give you a hand and we'll get through it.